Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the oddly fragrant world of 18th century Paris, a place where perfume and putrefaction held hands on every street corner. You're not in Versailles, no, you're standing ankle deep in alley slush, somewhere between a fishmonger's stall and a horse that gave up caring 2 hours ago. The year is 1745. You've just arrived in the French capital, hoping for candle-lit romance and revolutionary ideas. Instead, you're greeted by the bouquet of warm cheese, wet cobblestone, tobacco ash, and something best left unmentioned. Your shoes are already ruined. This isn't the Paris of tourists and Eiffel Towers. This is the Paris where gutters overflow and chamber pots fly, where you're never quite sure if the breeze carries the scent of fresh brioche or dead pigeon. And here's the twist. Someone actually had to smell all of this for a living. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little history trip travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward into the city, your boots squelching, ever so slightly. The smell hits you in waves: sour milk, wet wool, baking bread, and a hint of something metallic. Historians often argue whether Paris was objectively the smelliest capital in Europe at the time, or merely the most memorable. Either way, you're about to get very familiar with your nostrils. It starts with geography. Paris in the 1700s was a bowl. The Seine cut through it, but the city's natural shape didn't do much for drainage. Streets sloped just enough to let liquid things move, but not far enough to let them go away. Add in the lack of a functioning sewer system for most neighborhoods, and you've got a recipe for aromatic disaster. You walk past open markets. There are pigs' feet in baskets, live chickens fluttering half-dazed, fish that, judging by their eyes, gave up a while ago. No refrigeration here. Food turns quickly, and the smells ripen faster than you can say rotten turnip. The scent swirls, clinging to your clothes like needy ghosts. But perhaps the most consistent contributor to the city's bouquet is the people. Not their personalities. Mind you, their bodies. Bathing is sporadic at best. Water is often cold, sometimes dangerous, and always a hassle. Most folks rely on perfumes, powders, and a hearty layer of social denial. You don't bathe, you dust, and maybe dab on some rose water if you're feeling fancy. At this point, your nose has started to adjust, which is a shame. You turn down a narrow street, Rue du Rôtisseur, and immediately regret it. This is one of the city's many theme streets, unofficially designated by the professions that cluster there. This one's full of meat roasters, which might sound lovely, until you realize it's midsummer. The fat is rancid, and the drains are clogged with month-old bones. A cart rolls past, its wooden wheels squeaking like exhausted mice. It's piled high with refuse, vegetable scraps, cloth bits, the occasional suspiciously shaped bundle, one of the city's many boueurs or waste collectors. They're not exactly punctual, and they're not always sober. So the piles grow between pickups, and so do the flies. Yet amid this stew of scent and steam, life goes on. Children chase each other with sticks. Women haggle over turnips. Street musicians play flutes slightly off-key, likely trying to distract themselves from their own olfactory surroundings. There's laughter, shouting, the occasional shattering bottle, and underneath it all, the constant hum of smell, like a bass line you can't quite escape. Curiously, even noble areas have their own distinct funk. In the Marais, you pass an opulent townhouse. gold leaf on the windows, statues that haven't crumbled yet. And yet, the smell is there. Different, sure, but no less insistent. It's perfume, mixed with pipe smoke, mildew, and something that might be overcooked duck. The wealthy simply mask their odors better. Layers of musk and ambergris don't erase the stink. They just turn it into a different genre. This duality becomes a theme. Paris, at its core, is a city trying to outsmell itself, and the competition is fierce. By the time dusk settles in, you've walked nearly 5 miles, and your nose has processed more unique combinations than a spice merchant on payday. You pause by the Seine, hoping the water will smell cleaner. It doesn't. It smells like old rope, fermented cabbage, and river regret. And still, Parisians thrived. They dined, danced, debated, and dreamed, all while breathing in what most modern noses would consider a chemical weapon. The big question lingers like a bad whiff. How did anyone put up with this? Some scholars argue that olfactory desensitization played a role. Live in it long enough, and the smell becomes background noise. Others suggest cultural norms shaped expectations. If everyone stank, no one did. And there are even theories that the poor air quality actually strengthened immune systems, though we'll leave that one in the not peer-reviewed pile. Either way, something had to be done eventually, and the solution wasn't a giant bathtub. It was a man with a nose. You haven't met him yet, but he's coming, and he's going to change how you think about every breath you take in this city. For now, you curl up beneath a slanted window, using your coat as a makeshift pillow. A cat purrs nearby, smelling faintly of soot and sardine. Paris dreams on, rich in sound, color, and, unmistakably, scent. Morning in Paris smells like yesterday, because yesterday never left. You stir beneath your scratchy coat blanket as the first rays of sunlight squeeze between crooked buildings. A baker somewhere nearby has lit his oven, and for a brief moment, you're gifted with the comforting scent of rising bread. But don't get used to it. The sour reek of spoiled cabbage and last night's wine-soaked cobblestones is already reclaiming the stage. You're about to meet one of the city's strangest professionals, someone whose nose works overtime, so yours doesn't have to. But first, a little context. As Paris expanded in the 18th century, the smells didn't just stick around, they evolved. Odors began to reflect not only what people ate or threw away, but who they were. Class had a smell, occupation had a smell, even illness had a smell. And in a city with no unified sewer system, this nasal knowledge wasn't just trivia, it was survival. This is where the official street sniffer comes in. You spot him now, an older man with a brown felt coat, a ridiculous feathered hat, and a face that looks permanently squinted, like he's bracing for the next nasal assault. His name is Étienne. You know this because he's muttering it to himself while taking furious notes on a small, grimy notepad. Étienne is a pointologue, which roughly translates to smell expert, although no one uses that word with a straight face. His job is to walk the streets of Paris each day, categorizing the various odors that plague the public. He's not a sanitation worker. He doesn't clean anything. He just sniffs. He passes a butcher's stall and pauses. He leans in, far too close, and inhales like he's sampling wine. Sharp, he mutters, coppery with notes of onion. He scribbles something down and moves on. A woman selling lavender bouquets gives him a wide berth. This wasn't a government prank. Étienne is part of an actual initiative, one rooted in the city's growing panic over miasmas. You know, the belief that bad air causes disease. Historians, still debate how seriously these odor patrols were taken. Were they symbolic efforts to appear modern, or genuine attempts at pre-bacteriological hygiene? The answer might be both. C. During this period, the Enlightenment was gaining ground. Rational thinkers, scientists, and inventors were beginning to question old assumptions, but without microscopes that could confirm the existence of germs. Smell was often the only warning system. If something stank, it was assumed to be dangerous. And so Étienne became something of a frontline soldier in the invisible war against disease. His nose was his weapon, his pen, the record of potential doom, his dignity, negotiable. You follow him down Rue de la Lingerie. Don't get excited, it just means Laundry Street. This one lives up to its name. Linens hang above you like tired ghosts, dripping water, hopefully water, onto your shoulder. Étienne pauses beneath a particularly yellowed bedsheet and gives a thoughtful sniff. Boiled lye, slight tinge of goat. He nods, satisfied. He takes his role seriously. Some sniffers were known to undergo rudimentary training, where they learned to identify the olfactory signatures of various illnesses, spoilage stages, or chemical processes. Whether any of this worked is another matter entirely. But the city had no better tool. There were even moments, rare but documented, when sniffers caught early signs of cholera or typhoid outbreaks before doctors did, just by noticing that a neighborhood suddenly reeked of sweet decay or unseasonal rot. Those phrases might sound poetic, but in 18th century Paris they were red flags. Of course, not everyone appreciated the sniffers. Shopkeepers claimed Étienne's inspection scared off customers. Housewives accused him of inventing stenches to justify his paycheck. And in more than one case, he was chased away with a broom. Still, he marched on, cataloguing the invisible, describing the indescribable. One day, he tells you, he sniffed out a bakery that had been secretly dumping spoiled flour into the Seine. Another time, he followed the trail of a sickly sweet sulfur tang to a broken pipe that had been leaking into a popular public fountain. His work wasn't glamorous, but it occasionally made a difference. Even so, Étienne carries no badge, no uniform. His authority comes from his notebook and his nose. You notice the pages are filled with codes. C4B seems to mean faint, but foul, lingering. R6 could mean rotting, strong, moist. He's invented his own language to describe a city's dysfunction. It's bizarre, but oddly beautiful. As you trail him through a market square, you see him halt in front of a well-dressed man with a powdered wig and too much cologne. Étienne doesn't speak, just gives a short, wrinkled sniff and scribbles, violent lavender over mildew. The man scowls and steps away. Étienne shrugs. His neutrality is part of the job. He doesn't judge the source, only the scent. He once sniffed the king's own palace. Legend has it, he wrote, opulent, overripe, hints of furniture polish and despair. That comment was quietly removed from the official report. You start to see the absurd genius of it. In a time before sanitation standards or public health codes, the sniffer was a walking data collector, an organic sensor, a nasal historian, and if nothing else, he gave voice through odor to the silent warnings most people ignored. As the sun climbs higher, Étienne continues his rounds, heading toward a tannery district where things are sure to get worse. But you, mercifully, peel away and find a spot near a relatively clean fountain. The smell of horse droppings and burned feathers fades to the background. Birds chirp. Someone is baking bread again, maybe cinnamon this time. You sit down, trying to imagine a city without Étienne, a city where no one bothered to notice the smell, and it dawns on you. Sometimes the quiet heroes are the ones who inhale deeply and still keep walking. You wake to a sudden splash. Someone's just dumped a basin of something unspeakable into the street. Again. It's late morning in 18th century Paris, and the sun has begun coaxing every unpleasant molecule from the gutters, barrels, and cloth, piles that line the road. The warm air rises in invisible waves, carrying with it the full olfactory opera of the city. Now that you've shadowed Étienne for a day, it's time to understand the battlefield he works on. The streets themselves. Parisian. Streets in the 1700s are not wide boulevards flanked by elegant lamps. They're more like slits between buildings, uneven, narrow, and full of secrets. Cobblestones form patchy mosaics, interrupted by deep ruts carved by cartwheels and erosion. The center of each street often features a small trench or channel, called a cunette, which technically serves to carry wastewater downhill. Technically is doing a lot of work here. You walk a block and discover that this so-called drainage system is clogged with cabbage leaves, fish scales, feathers, straw, and something that might be an entire sock. The cunette has become more symbolic than functional. When it rains, the streets turn to soup. When it doesn't, the residue simply bakes. And here's the kicker. These streets are multi-purpose. They're walkways, waste channels, social gathering, spots, even marketplaces. Imagine selling jewelry next to a horse relieving itself. Now imagine buying jewelry there. Historians still debate whether this street-level chaos was due to poor planning or simple urban evolution. Some suggest that Paris was never meant to handle so many bodies packed so tightly. Others argue the city did exactly what it was designed to do, just without accounting for weather, waste, or wind direction. You pass a group of women scrubbing clothes in buckets. Soap bubbles swirl across the cobbles like tiny, doomed dreams. The women chat, laugh, complain. Their backs ache, their hands are red, and all of them are unconsciously stepping around dark puddles they've learned not to question. Above them, a window creaks open. You stop mid-step, and with good reason. The window belongs to a third-floor flat. A hand emerges. It's holding a ceramic pot. The arm gives a lazy flick, and a brownish splash rains down into the street, just missing a pedestrian by inches. The victim yells something colorful, shakes a fist, and keeps walking. This is not unusual. In fact, it's baked into the rhythm of Parisian life. See, most homes in this era don't have bathrooms, at least not as we know them. Chamber pots are the rule, not the exception. You do your business in a bowl or pot, then toss the contents into the street. Supposedly, etiquette requires a warning shout, "Garde l'eau," which means watch out for the water. But, as you just witnessed, not everyone has perfect manners. Some buildings designate specific windows for dumping. Others have private arrangements with collectors who stop by with carts to pick up the goods. But mostly, the street gets it. It's here you start to notice the stratification of smells. The upper classes tend to dump their waste more discreetly, behind their homes perhaps, or into garden compost piles they pay someone else to empty. The lower classes, by necessity, use the street like a toilet, a kitchen sink, and a trash chute all at once. And in these layers, smells settle like sediment. Top notes, floral perfumes from someone's balcony. Mid notes, roast goose, garlic, pipe smoke. Base notes, mildew, rotting turnips, and unmentionable liquids. It would almost be poetic if it weren't sticking to your boots. You follow a child pushing a hoop with a stick, a universal pastime apparently, until he darts into a narrow alleyway. Inside, the smell hits like a wall. No airflow, no sun, just moisture, meat, and mold. You press forward out of morbid curiosity. Here, among the shadows, are the city's waste barrels. These are meant to be emptied by chiffoniers, or rag pickers, who collect usable scraps from garbage. They're part recycler, part scavenger, part urban legend. They live on the edge, both literally and socially, and many believe they can sniff out value like bloodhounds. You watch one such man dig through a barrel with a stick. He pulls out an old shoe, sniffs it, shrugs, and tucks it under his arm like treasure. Then he waves at you, smiling with teeth the color of walnut shells. Another man walks past with 2 full buckets swinging from a yoke across his shoulders. They slosh ominously. He's part of the vidangeurs, or night soil collectors, who empty cesspits for a fee. Their route is irregular, their attitude gruff, and their boots heroic. These are the unsung heroes who keep the worst of the worst from rising to street level, but only just. You return to the main road, and as you emerge from the alley, the air almost feels fresh. Almost. Some Parisians try to manage the odor with home remedies, burning herbs, hanging lavender near the windows, sprinkling vinegar in corners. None of it worked for long. The best you could hope for was temporary distraction. Curiously, some aristocrats even turned smells into entertainment. Scented balls, called pomanders, were carried or worn to combat the stink. Filled with spices, flowers, or citrus peels, these decorative orbs were as much a status symbol as a nostril saver. The more pungent your city, the fancier your pomander. Yet, for all the cleverness, nothing truly cleaned the streets. And so, the sniffer's job remained vital, not because he could eliminate the smells, but because he could interpret them. A musky staleness might suggest a rotting food cache under floorboards. A sudden sharp tang could signal an animal carcass in the walls. A lingering sweetness in a wine shop, possibly spilled cider, or mold blooming behind the casks. The nose knew things. You take one last look at the tangled roads of the Marais. Someone's playing a fiddle. A baker tosses out stale bread to pigeons. A beggar snoozes under an archway, his dreams lightly flavored by the city's every pungent note. In Paris, the streets are alive. Not just with people, but with aroma, memory, and ancient, sticky secrets. You start the day with a simple goal. Walk 10 minutes without getting dripped on. But Paris has other plans. You're heading down Rue de Gravellier now, where the buildings lean like tired old men and the windows above you all seem slightly too open. You walk quickly, chin tucked, bracing for the worst. And yet, a shadow looms on the stone wall beside you. You look up. Too late. A splash lands a foot in front of you, dark and steaming. The woman in the window doesn't shout, "Garde! Allô!" She just stares down at you with the detached indifference of someone who's already forgotten what she just did. She disappears. The shutter slams. Welcome to Paris. You detour into a small courtyard to regain composure and possibly find dry socks. But instead, you find a story. A man is pushing a wheeled cart covered in burlap. It's not the garbage collector. It's a mattress emptier. Yes, you heard that right. Mattresses in this era aren't memory foam marvels. They're sacks filled with straw, feathers, sometimes moss or horsehair. Over time, they gather more than dreams. Lice, mites, mold, sweat, drool, and whatever else happens when people sleep in the same bed for a decade straight. So, a mattress gets opened. The filler is removed. The sack is scraped, turned inside out, sometimes dusted with sulfur powder. If you're rich, a servant handles it. If you're poor, you do it yourself and hope for the best. The mattress man's cart smells like a combination of barnyard and lavender soap, a contradiction that somehow encapsulates Paris perfectly. As you leave the courtyard, dodging a group of geese that appear to be plotting something, you start to reflect on the logistics of all this. Where does it all go? The refuse, the waste, the soiled hay, the dead cats, the pigeon bones, the broken bottles, the bad cheese, the broken chamber pots. The answer? Mostly, the Seine. The river cuts through the city like a lifeline. But in the 1700s, it's more like a Venus backflow. Anything that isn't carted out, or buried, burned, or forgotten ends up here. The Seine is Paris's trash, can, toilet, and, tragically, water source. You approach the Pont Marie Bridge and lean over. The water below is opaque, a thick greenish brown with occasional surprises. A half-submerged apple, a leather shoe, and what looks suspiciously like a wig. People still wash clothes in this. Some even drink from it. They boil it first, if they can. Historians still argue whether the Seine was ever truly clean during this era. Some say its flow kept it relatively flushed, while others describe it as a moving broth of rot and runoff. Either way, you're not dipping your toes in. You watch as a barge glides by, low in the water from the weight of its cargo. Barrels, bundled fabrics, crates of salted fish. All of it destined for trade, markets, or, if it falls overboard, future. Archaeologists. But the real surprise is what you don't see. Toilets. Unlike Rome centuries earlier, Paris had no grand sewer system. Not yet. What it had was an informal network of cesspools, ditches, and improvisation. Some homes had privies, wooden boxes over shallow pits. Others relied on bordaloos, a kind of chamber pot shaped like a gravy boat that women tucked beneath their skirts during long church services. In a city where privacy was rare and plumbing was a fantasy, the ingenuity was real. You follow a municipal worker, or égoutier, as he lifts a street hatch and descends into one of the older, semi-functional tunnels. These early sewers are cramped, wet, and only occasionally mapped. Many lead nowhere. Some leak into basements. A few connect to larger drains that reach the river. But it's haphazard at best. The égoutier wears heavy boots and a waxed cloak. He carries a torch and hums to himself, not out of happiness, but as a rhythm to keep time in the dark. The scent, wafting up from the hatch, is thick and earthy, like compost mixed with secrets. You wisely remain above ground. From the other side of the street, Étienne the sniffer watches the open manhole with narrowed eyes. He's taken out a vial from his satchel and dipped a cloth in it, vinegar with lavender, an old sniffer's trick. Not to block out the odor, but to reset the nose. He sees you watching and gives a slight shrug. Better than wine, he says, then promptly sneezes. You return to the matter of waste. Paris, in all its fragrant glory, operated without centralized waste removal for centuries. Instead, neighborhoods hired local boueurs, trash men with carts and buckets, who came when called. There was no schedule, no guarantees. It was, quite literally, a toss-up. Some landlords paid extra to have waste dumped outside city walls. Others paid less and hoped no one noticed when it went down a nearby storm drain. And when it rained, everything flowed, sometimes into cellars, sometimes back up into kitchens. A heavy rainstorm in 1740 reportedly caused so much backwash in the Latin Quarter that several streets had to be shoveled, not swept. Yet somehow the city functioned. People adapted. They bought longer boots. They kept their windows shut. They held their breath. A favorite trick of Parisians. a small bundle of herbs worn around the neck or tied to a walking stick. Some even use sponges soaked in vinegar, held discreetly under the nose. Smelling sponge chic, you might call it. A strange precursor to scented hand sanitizer, but with more mold. You find yourself now in Les Halles, the bustling market district. If Paris has a nose, this is where it sniffs itself. The scent here is ever-changing. Smoked ham, warm wine, bruised peaches, wet bread, and animal hides drying in the sun. There's chaos, yes, but also order. Traders know where to stand, so they're upwind of the fish. Shoppers time their visits to avoid the heat of the day, and children dart between stalls with a sixth sense for avoiding puddles. The smell is almost festive, until, of course, the cheese cart overturns. A round of aged brie hits the cobblestone like a water balloon. The scent is immediate, rich, sulfuric, almost meaty. Étienne materializes beside you like a shadow. Category L5, he murmurs. Unstable, fermented, notes of regret. You nod, pretending to understand, because in this city, to live is to sniff. And to sniff is to know far more than you probably want to. You're halfway across a stone footbridge now, the breeze mercifully blowing away from you for once. The Seine below gurgles softly, its murky depths glinting under a midday sun that seems wholly unconcerned with the microbial drama beneath. Today's goal: figure out where everything goes after it hits the street. Because believe it or not, even a city as scent-rich and structurally confused as 18th century Paris had a system. A loose, creaky, crevasse-filled system, but still, there was logic somewhere underneath all that cabbage water. You begin at one of the countless narrow alleys that slope down toward the river, following a series of sticky trails you really hope came from fruit. The ground under your feet turns from stone to packed earth to something that squelches slightly. You try not to think too hard about it. Along the way, you pass the back entrance of a bakery. Crates of stale baguettes have been dumped in a bin, presumably for pigs, or judging by the small army of rats holding a committee meeting, other enthusiastic diners. The smell is yeasty and sour, but relatively mild. Then comes the turn, a tanner's yard. The smell hits like a rogue cloud, sharp, acidic, eye-watering. This is where animal hides are processed, and the process is neither brief nor pleasant. First, the hides are soaked in water. Then they're soaked again in urine. Yes, human urine. Often collected from chamber pots and sold to the tanneries. After that, the hides are treated with lime and scraped until soft. This process releases fumes that are less earthy and more industrial strength nose punch. Étienne once called the scent like chewing copper through a wool sock. That feels generous. Historians still argue whether tanners in Paris were socially isolated because of their smell or their profession. It's likely both. Many tanneries were relegated to the outskirts of the city, near rivers or low ground where runoff would be less noticed. You get the feeling that was wishful thinking. You press on, passing a butcher's back door. A row of pigs' heads hang from a hook like grotesque Christmas ornaments. The air is thick with blood, salt, and something vaguely metallic. But that's not what you're here for. You're tracking the path of waste. And now, you find the real star of the Parisian underworld, the cesspit. Every home had one, a stone-lined hole beneath or behind the building into which everything went. Wastewater, kitchen scraps, human waste, dead rats. Occasionally, unwanted secrets. When the cesspit filled, because of course it did, someone had to empty it. Enter the vidangeurs, the night soil men. Brave, if underappreciated. They would show up with carts, barrels, and long-handled scoops, usually under cover of darkness. They'd lower themselves into the pits with ropes, scrape out the sludge, and haul it away. Where to? That's the real kicker. Some waste was taken to fields outside Paris and used as fertilizer. Night soil, it was called. Other times it was dumped into the Seine at designated points far downstream. Occasionally, when quotas weren't enforced or bribes changed hands, the waste just disappeared, tipped into dry wells, into alleyway, drains, into storm channels that, you guessed it, led right back into the Seine inside the city. You follow a cart piled high with sealed barrels as it rattles down a slope toward the old stone gate of Saint-Antoine. The driver whistles and snaps the reins. The mule looks like it's reconsidering its life choices. The barrels slosh ominously. You imagine them cracking open in the road. It's happened. There's a record from 1761 describing an unfortunate spill on Rue Saint-Honoré that rendered the street unpassable for 3 days. It doesn't elaborate. You're thankful. Étienne once told you about a sniffer who tracked a series of nose-wrinkling complaints to a tavern's basement. Turned out, their cesspit had cracked, and the waste had slowly seeped into the ale cellar. The tavern tried to cover it with extra cinnamon. It did not work. The closer you follow these carts, the more you realize how decentralized everything is. There's no city-wide waste management, no central authority ensuring hygiene. Each parish has its own vague set of rules. Some streets ban dumping, others don't. Some landlords hire proper collectors. Others hire the cheapest men they can find, who may or may not own boots. And so, a huge portion of the waste, not just human, but food, cloth, and organic rot, remains in circulation far longer than it should. This means that Étienne's job isn't just olfactory, it's detective work. He doesn't just sniff and scribble, he asks questions. Where did that smell come from? When did it start? How does it change through the day? What direction does the wind blow at noon versus dusk? He once traced a fermented shoe polish smell to a collapsed beam in a boarding house where a chamber pot had been knocked into a wall cavity and sealed in by accident. It had been there for months. The residents thought it was just the neighbor's lunch. It wasn't. The city did attempt reforms, mostly in the form of fines. You could be ticketed for dumping waste outside your allowed hours, early morning or late evening. But enforcement was spotty, and most people preferred the risk to carrying full chamber pots back up the stairs. The aristocracy, of course, had alternatives. Many townhouses were equipped with dry closets, early versions of indoor toilets that funneled waste into private brick-lined pits. They smelled less, cost more, and required discreet staff to manage. But most people? They had a pot, a window, and a quick arm. You finally reach the edge of the city, past the tanners, past the rag pickers, past the hill where the wind changes direction. You find a field dotted with steaming mounds, night soil dumped for use by farmers. A man in a straw hat waves at you. He's up to his knees in the stuff, cheerfully whistling as he stirs the sludge with a pitchfork. This, he explains, will be spread over cabbage crops by spring. Cabbage. You make a mental note to question your next soup, and as the wind shifts and the scent hits you square in the soul, you realize everything in Paris is connected. What people eat, what they wear, what they discard, and what they breathe. It all cycles through the same streets, the same systems, the same river. Even the smells, especially the smells. You leave the cabbage field behind, grateful for the distance, though the scent stubbornly follows. Even your clothes seem to have absorbed Paris's unofficial perfume, an evolving blend of sweat, soil, and subtle menace. You need a palate cleanser, something that doesn't reek of decomposition or digestion. Something floral. So you head west, toward the fancier quarters, where the air is allegedly sweeter and the streets cleaner, at least in theory. As you approach Rue Saint-Honoré, the change is immediate. The cobblestones are tighter, the gutters are slightly less alive, and most importantly, the perfume shops begin to appear. Ah, perfume. The desperate weapon of the aristocracy in there, losing war against reality. You pass an apothecary window with dozens of tiny glass vials, each labeled in ornate script: essence de rose, musc d'ambre, citron vert, fleur de lys. The labels shimmer in the sunlight, promising olfactory salvation. Inside, a woman is daintily dabbing perfume behind her ears, using what looks like a swan feather-tipped wand. You realize she's standing next to a stack of chamber pots. The irony is not lost on you. In the 18th century, perfume was more than a luxury. It was an essential. Not just for masking body odor, but for survival. At least in polite society. A well-scented individual was seen as clean, respectable, even virtuous. A foul-smelling one? Suspicious. Possibly diseased. Definitely poor. Historians still discuss whether perfume culture in Paris was driven more by fashion or fear. After all, if bad smells caused disease, as many believed, then perfume wasn't just cosmetic, it was protection, like a nasal talisman. You step into a perfumer's boutique. The air inside is thick with competing aromas: bergamot, clove, violets, orange blossom. It's both intoxicating and suffocating, like being hugged by an enthusiastic garden. The shopkeeper, Monsieur Léon, offers you a whiff of his newest creation, L'Innocence Divine. You politely lean in. It smells like almond paste and old lace, with a faint undertone of candle smoke. Made for the Duchesse d'Aiguillon, he says, chest puffed, to be worn in times of discomfort. You glance at the open sewer channel running outside his door and nod. How appropriate. Perfume making at the time was a serious art. Distillation, infusion, maceration. It was closer to chemistry than crafting. Ingredients came from around the world. Cinnamon from Ceylon, jasmine from Egypt, sandalwood from India. These rare materials were blended by skilled nez, literally noses, who trained for years to identify hundreds of subtle notes. But even the best perfume had its limits. A single dab might cover a sweaty wrist. A whole person, not so much. And so the rich developed layers: perfumed gloves, scented scarves, powdered wigs laced with floral oils. Their pets even wore tiny sachets. Carriages were spritzed with orange water. Fans were soaked in lilac essence. Even writing paper was perfumed, so your letters could insult someone with dignity. But the more you sniff, the more you notice something. The perfumes themselves are strong. Overpowering even. They don't dance with your nose. They wrestle it. And this is no accident. The perfumers weren't trying to complement natural body scent. They were trying to defeat it, like trying to drown a tuba with violins. They had to be loud, aggressive, persistent. Subtlety would lose to the garlic and goat fumes of daily life within minutes. There's a legend about a nobleman who wore so much jasmine oil that bees followed him through the palace gardens. He called it an inconvenience of elegance. His valet called it a nightmare. Of course, not all Parisians had access to perfume. The lower classes made do with vinegar washes, lavender bundles, or no effort whatsoever. Étienne once told you that the olfactory gap between nobles and peasants wasn't just socio-economic, it was tactical. The rich could afford to live in a bubble of curated air. The The poor lived in the real world, and even the rich couldn't always escape. You step into a carriage house where a noblewoman's coach is being cleaned. The lacquered wood gleams, the curtains are velvet, but the scent, eau de horse sweat, mixed with old cheese and a splash of desperation. No amount of rose water could fix that. The coachman catches your expression and shrugs. It smells like money, he says. You leave the perfume district with your nose feeling both pampered and assaulted. There's a strange phenomenon in your sinuses now, like they've been polished. Everything smells sharper. You can pick out burnt almonds from 3 stalls away. Someone's cooking eel. Someone else is washing their laundry in lavender soap. And there, faint but unmistakable, Étienne's vinegar cloth. You find him sniffing the base of a statue. Birds, he says, without looking up. But also, cherries. Someone dumped a tart. He logs the incident and offers you a sniff of his reset cloth. You decline. Then, with an oddly philosophical tone, he says, "Perfume is a kind of lie. Yes, but lies are sometimes kinder than the truth." He's not wrong. For many Parisians, scent was identity. It told others who you were, what you could afford, how closely you rubbed shoulders with decay or dignity. Even absence of smell could be suspicious. If you didn't wear perfume, were you trying to hide something? Smell became social currency. It was also espionage. One countess was said to leave behind a distinctive trail of orange flower water so her lover could follow her carriage by scent alone. Another noble used perfume to signal gossip. Jasmine meant good news, patchouli meant scandal, or so the rumors went. You end the day on a rooftop garden, high above the stench and swirl of the city below. The plants up here, mint, rosemary, thyme, offer a rare kind of relief. You inhale deeply. The air is thinner, lighter, less lived in, and for a fleeting moment, Paris smells like possibility. Then a breeze shifts, and you're back in it. You descend from the rooftop garden with a reluctant sigh, as if your lungs already miss that fleeting breath of clarity. Back on street level, Paris resumes its usual olfactory schedule. Breakfast meats, boiled linen, and the ever-present undertones of open humanity. But now, with your senses sharpened by flowers and vinegar cloths, you start noticing something strange. Some people seem immune to it all. Their clothes are pristine. Their shoes lack the telltale splash patterns of street residue. They walk confidently down the slickest alleys, as though the city rearranges itself to accommodate their ankles. You're in the presence of the silk-socked elite. If perfume was the aristocrats' response to stench, then fashion was their rebuttal to filth. Not just a matter of appearances, it was a declaration of victory over mud, rot, and unfortunate puddles. And there's no better symbol of that than white silk stockings. It defies logic, but there they are, powdered men in pale breeches and snowy hose, stepping out of carriages into streets that look like soup. You trail one such man, his stockings so bright they reflect sunlight. You stare, slack-jawed, waiting for the moment he steps in something tragic. He never does. That's the thing. These people have roots, rituals, routines. Servants rush ahead to assess the pavement. Carriage drivers park with surgical precision. Valets carry foldable footstools. In the slipperiest areas, some elite households even hired street sweepers to walk ahead of their masters. Broom in one hand, vigilance in the other. It's an entire infrastructure built around not touching Paris. You follow the silk socks to a salon, a kind of 18th century lounge for nobles to discuss art, politics, and quite often, themselves. You slip in quietly and take a seat behind a potted plant that smells suspiciously like spoiled meat disguised with rosemary. Inside, powdered heads nod and murmur. A debate is underway. not about war or taxation or the Enlightenment, but about shoe polish. The Count of Lemieux insists that a blend of beeswax and pine sap keeps his boots both supple and impermeable. A baroness snorts. Her own concoction involves goose fat and chalk. It leaves a pleasant sheen, she claims, and repels fish water. They're not joking. Footwear is more than fashion here. It's survival equipment. The streets are treacherous. One misstep, and you're knee-deep in mystery broth. So noblemen wore heeled shoes, polished within an inch of their lives. Women lifted their skirts and trained themselves to float like ghosts. Even accessories had anti-Paris features. Canes with curved handles for lifting hems. Gloves stitched with linen so they could be boiled after a market visit. Cloaks lined with waxed cotton to protect from skyborne chamber pot disasters. Historians still argue whether these protective habits stemmed from hygiene or vanity, probably both. Either way, the effect was theatrical. The aristocracy glided through Paris like divine beings, untouched by the chaos their servants managed in their wake. You catch sight of one of the valets outside, brushing the cuffs of his master's breeches with a stiff brush. He doesn't flinch as a rat darts past. His job is to erase Paris, at least from the record, but not everyone in silk was safe. There's a story Étienne likes to tell about a nobleman who ignored his valet's warning and chose a shortcut through a market alley. A wheelbarrow overturned, a duck panicked, a girl spilled her eel basket. One thing led to another, and he slipped into the cunette. Ruined stockings, tarnished pride, smelled like old mustard for a week. Ever since, the phrase le glissement de soie, the silk slip, has become a quiet joke among street sniffers and stable boys. A reminder that no one, no matter how perfumed or powdered, is truly above. The city's mess, and it's not just about appearance. Clothing can lie, but smell doesn't. You pass a young noblewoman stepping delicately across a board bridge set over a ditch. Her skirts are stitched with hundreds of embroidered flowers. Her cheeks are dotted with rouge. But as she lifts her hem, the unmistakable scent of mildew trails behind. The gown has been stored in a damp armoire, and just like that, her illusion falters. In Paris, your nose is a gossip. The rich knew it too. That's why salons were often overrun with floral arrangements. Candles were scented. Even ink was sometimes infused with ambergris to make correspondence smell expensive. The goal wasn't just elegance, it was olfactory camouflage. Still, not all nobles had the finesse of a silk-wrapped shadow. Some were simply loud. You encounter one such gentleman outside a theatre. His cravat is enormous, his cologne is audible, and his voice is attempting to negotiate with a fishmonger about something no one wants clarified. His every motion sends waves of violet tragedy into the crowd. Étienne, passing by, sniffs once and mutters, "Desperation," with bergamot, but there's no judgment in his tone, just observation. As always, you watch the man strut away, cape billowing like a sail, until he disappears around a corner, only to hear a loud splash and a yelp. A moment later, a servant jogs into view with a towel. You imagine the towels of 18th century Paris have seen things no towel should, and suddenly it strikes you. Fashion, perfume, etiquette, they're all defenses. Soft armor against a hard city. Silk stockings might be ridiculous in a world of open sewers and meat carts, but they're also aspirational, a dream of order in a world of smells. You end the evening on a bench beside a lamplighter who's finishing his rounds. The smell of oil mingles with the faint scent of cinnamon biscuits from a nearby stall. You glance down. Your shoes are coated. In the day's history, you don't even mind, because now you understand. Paris doesn't just live through sound and sight. It breathes through its streets, and sometimes it wears silk socks. You awaken to coughing, not your own. A hacking, gut-deep rattle echoes from a building across the street. It's early morning again in 18th century Paris, and while the city never exactly smells clean, the air today feels thicker, more weighted. A scent like boiled onions left in a dark hallway. You pull your collar over your nose. It doesn't help. You're outside the Hôtel Dieu, the oldest hospital in the city. From a distance, it looks respectable. Tall arched windows, wrought iron gates, a statue of Saint Sebastian doing his best to look unconcerned. Up close, though, it's a different story. The scent hits you first. A humid blend of sweat, candle wax, urine, musty wool, and something faintly metallic, like a rusted spoon left in milk. Hospitals in this era aren't what you'd hope for, or even expect. You follow the scent and the sound, stepping into the entry hall behind a nun, balancing a bucket that smells like despair. The inside is dark, crowded, beds lined wall to wall, many shared by multiple patients, breathing, groaning, wheezing. The air barely moves. You suspect that any breeze would simply turn back around. Welcome to the theatre of healing. The Hôtel Dieu isn't unique in its approach. Most hospitals at the time operated more like warehouses for the unwell. Rich patients avoided them entirely, preferring to be treated at home with personal physicians and a much higher thread count. The poor, however, ended up here, and here is a place of smells. Your nose tries to make sense of the layers. There's dried blood, burned herbs, stale broth, something pungent underfoot that may or may not have once been linen, and something else. Medicinal? Vinegar? Turpentine? You edge toward a row of beds, where a priest is administering last rites on one side and a barber surgeon is prepping leeches on the other. Behind him, a boy with a mop tries in vain to erase a red stain from the floor. He's using rose water. It's not working. Historians still argue whether hospitals helped more than they harmed. Mortality rates in places like Hôtel Dieu were staggeringly high, especially during epidemics. But for the poor, there weren't many choices. A hospital might smell like fear and cabbage, but at least it had a roof. You find Étienne near a rear hallway, nose twitching. They've opened. "The windows today," he says, gesturing toward a narrow slat of light near the ceiling. "The smell is only 70% lethal." He's joking. Probably. In truth, the Parisian government was beginning, just beginning, to consider the link between air and illness. While the germ theory of disease was still a century off, the idea of miasma, bad air as a vector for sickness, was well established, which is why hospitals were sometimes fumigated with burning herbs, or treated with vinegar-washed walls, or, in more desperate times, scrubbed with urine, under the theory that a strong smell could overpower a bad one. That's right. People tried to fight deadly air with different air. You move deeper into the wards. A nurse passes with a tray of bandages. The smell trails her like a cape. Sour milk, carbolic acid, and sweat. She smiles weakly, as if daring you to say anything. You don't. There's a woman in the corner moaning softly. A man across from her is weeping. Not from pain, you realize, but from the smoke drifting in from a censer-burning sage and rosemary. It's supposed to cleanse the air. Mostly it makes you sneeze. One doctor is treating a patient with a compress soaked in wine. Another applies mustard paste to a swollen ankle. A third is attempting to draw out bad humors with a heated glass jar. The man on the receiving end appears skeptical. So is your stomach. In the surgical wing, the floor is sanded, not for traction, but to absorb blood. You can smell the iron tang before you see anything. It's sharp and ancient, like wet pennies on a warm plate. A pile of used bandages sits in the corner, destined to be washed and reused. Soap is in short supply. Clean water even more so. You watch a basin be emptied into a bucket, then reused to soak linens. A small part of your soul retreats into your shoes, and yet, somehow, amid all this, there's care. A nun adjusts a pillow with surprising tenderness. A boy gently wipes his father's brow. A patient smiles at you, lips dry, eyes luminous with gratitude that someone is nearby. There's something undeniably human in the rot and rhythm of this place. You step outside for air that smells merely terrible. Étienne joins you, scribbling in his notebook. Today's aroma, he says, is rich with consequence. You raise an eyebrow. Medical funk, he adds, with notes of mortality and stewed carrots. The hospitals, it turns out, were among his least favorite places to sniff. Not because of the intensity, but because the smell was constantly shifting. It's unpredictable, he explains. Diseases have moods. There's truth in that. Smallpox smells different than dysentery. Gangrene doesn't just reek, it radiates. Even recovery has a scent, sweat tinged with broth and the sweetish breath of someone who's finally eating again. The sniffers' reports from hospitals were often poetic, laced with melancholy. One such note read, "Today the wards carry a fragrance of forgetfulness, lilac water, lost bread, and the whisper of linen too often folded." Another, "An odd sweetness lingers today, like apricots in a cellar. The fevered girl has died." You sit with Étienne on a low stone bench as a cart rattles by, filled with straw mattresses and the weary groans of recovery. It's awful. It's beautiful. It's Paris. And as a fresh gust of wind brings the scent of the river, alive, shifting, undeniable, you remember something crucial. The city is a body, and smell is its language. You just have to listen. You don't think of toilets the same way anymore, not after Paris. It's mid-afternoon now, and you've decided, perhaps ill-advisedly, to visit one of the city's public facilities, the kind of place whispered about in alleyway gossip and avoided by the upper class like a debt collector with good aim. You find it tucked between a stable and a hatmaker's shop, a small wooden structure barely the size of a garden shed. A sign above reads, "Retreat Commune," communal retreat. That's certainly one way to frame it. A man exits just as you approach, his expression blank, haunted, a face that's seen things. You take a breath, step inside, and immediately regret your life choices. The air is heavy, moist, smells like boiled leather, aged urine, and onions that lost a bar fight. You clutch your sleeve to your nose and try not to breathe too deeply. This is la chaise publique, the public chair. Except there's no actual chair, just a rough wooden plank with a hole, a bucket beneath it, and dignity nowhere in sight. Sometimes, in higher traffic areas, there's a partition or curtain. Today there isn't. And here's the twist. This is better than many private arrangements. In poorer homes, facilities are more improvisational. Buckets in corners, chamber pots under, beds. If you're lucky, a wooden bench in a backyard. And those buckets, they're emptied by hand, sometimes by the residents, sometimes by a member of a strange, essential profession, the bucket men. Étienne calls them the symphony of the slosh. They come at odd hours, hauling full buckets out of tenements, down slippery staircases through narrow alleys and into the fog of Paris. Some are paid a coin or two per trip. Others, in especially poor neighborhoods, are paid in food, favors, or not at all. You follow one such man now. Jacques, he says, though you suspect that's a placeholder name he uses with people who ask too many questions. He wears patched boots and carries 2 tin buckets swinging from a wooden yoke. Light today, he grunts. Bad sign. Means people are ill, not eating. It's the kind of logic only someone waist-deep in Paris's digestive habits could formulate. You tag, along as he stops at a crumbling stone building. The hallway smells like mold and old onions. Upstairs, a woman waves at him, lifting a sloshing pot wrapped in cloth. Jacques takes it without a word and replaces it with an empty one. There's no exchange of money, just a nod. As you descend, the stairs, he explains his route. This street, then 2 more near Rue Mouffetard, then the tannery. By the end of the week, he'll dump it all at a designated site outside the city walls. You ask if he's ever spilled a bucket. He doesn't. Answer, just looks into the distance like a veteran recalling a battlefield. These men, like Jacques, are crucial to the functioning of Paris. But they're treated like ghosts, not hated exactly, just unseen, until they spill something. Then they're everyone's enemy. Historians still argue whether public sanitation in Paris was deliberately decentralized to avoid responsibility or simply evolved that way out of necessity. What's clear is this: the city relied on individuals like Jacques to manage what it refused to systematize. And the smell, that was part of the deal. Smell gave away where the bucket men had been, a faint ammonia trail down a staircase, a sour note clinging to a building's side wall, an unexpected burst of methane in a flower-lined courtyard. Jacques says he can track fellow workers by nose alone. You reach his final stop, a tavern with a back room. He disappears through a door marked privé and returns with a full bucket and a damp rag on his shoulder. They never clean the seat, he mutters. I don't sit, but still, it's the principle. You help him lift the buckets onto his cart, surprised by the weight. They're made of tin now, lighter than the older wooden ones. But still, each step sends a ripple sloshing perilously close to your boots. As you part ways, he gives you a nod. Not a smile, but something like gratitude. Back in the street, you notice something else. A woman walking briskly with a parasol, her heels clicking delicately. She passes Jacques without acknowledgement. Not cruelty, just indifference, like he's part of the architecture. And maybe that's the point. Paris, as you're realizing, runs on invisible labor. The sniffers, the sweepers, the bucket haulers, each one essential. Each one practically scent-marked by their work, and each one treated like the backdrop to someone else's story. You return to the public latrine and see another man entering. He pauses, makes a face, and goes in anyway. Because in this city, convenience trumps comfort, and no matter how elegant the perfume or how silken the socks, everyone's got to go, even the king. There are rumors that Louis XV had a golden commode. It traveled with him. Heated seat, lavender water rinse, but it still had to be emptied by hand, still had to be sniffed, still had to be carried by someone like Jacques. You pass a small boy crouching near a drain, poking it with a stick. A moment. Later he recoils, holding his nose. He's learning early. At the next corner, Étienne greets you with a knowing glance. Your eyes are watering, he says. You nod. Public toilet. You nod again. He grins. Category H4, he says, with notes of regret and civic failure. And with that, he disappears into the crowd, chasing a new scent that, to him, spells a new clue. You, meanwhile, look down at your boots, wet again, and accept the truth of Paris. Every step tells a story, and some of them smell awful. You're standing at the edge of a fountain. Well, what used to be a fountain. Now it's more of a mossy puddle with sculptural ambition. The carved lion's mouth, once proud and flowing, drips weakly into a shallow basin populated mostly by algae and pigeons with boundary issues. This is where you meet the official nose of Paris, Étienne. Not just any sniffer on the street. He is the Le Sniff Inspecteur, the city's most seasoned scent sleuth, appointed by some obscure municipal ordinance and held in equal parts awe, pity, and nose-wrinkling confusion. He approaches with purpose today. No idle sniffing. No poetic musings about mildew. He's on assignment. There's been a complaint, he says. He pulls out a folded sheet of parchment, waves it like a warrant, and gestures for you to follow. You do, because once you've walked through sewage puddles and into public latrines, you stop resisting momentum. The complaint came from un marchand en rue des Petits Carreaux, something about a sweet, lingering death smell, which isn't exactly what you want on a market street known for strawberries and second-hand lace. As you arrive, Étienne pauses dramatically. He closes his eyes, raises his nose to the sky, and inhales like a wine critic. You do the same. Nothing. Or rather, everything. Paris is always a buffet, roasting chestnuts, coal smoke, fish, horses, laundry steam. So how can anyone pinpoint one smell? That's the trick. That's why Étienne's profession exists. He starts walking in slow, spiraling arcs. His notebook comes out. He jots things down. You peek. Top note, fennel, mid, wax, urine, base, sugared rot. You trail behind him as he ducks beneath awnings, pokes his head into doorways and leans, questionably, close to cellar grates. Occasionally, he mutters things like fermented upholstery or cabbage, wearing a mask. Eventually, he stops in front of a hat shop. This is it, he says. The shopkeeper, a tiny man with enormous eyebrows, protests immediately. Impossible! My hats are clean. I dust them every week. Étienne nods solemnly and enters. Inside, it's dark and slightly humid. Rows of felted top hats line the walls. A mannequin stares at you with judgment. And beneath it all, yes, there it is. A cloying sweetness, like candy left too long in a cellar. Faintly fruity. Wrong. Étienne crouches near a floorboard and sniffs. Dead. Mouse, he announces. Possibly two. He taps the board. Hollow. The shopkeeper is mortified. You may want to pull up the flooring, Étienne advises, and burn your peppermint sachets. They're making it worse. Outside, he logs the incident with characteristic flair. Rue des Petits Carreaux, 4:17 p.m. Shop carries olfactory echo of death masked in mint. Rodent expiration probable. Further investigation advised before hat sales continue. You ask him whether this sort of thing happens often. Oh, constantly, he replies. The city is a sponge, absorbs everything, then it sweats. He continues his rounds, and you begin to appreciate the method in his madness. Étienne doesn't just identify bad smells, he identifies patterns. A certain staleness in a bread. Stall might signal a bad grain shipment. A sudden mildew bloom in an apartment stairwell could mean a leaking pipe, or worse, a backed-up cesspit. Historians still debate how effective these noses were. Some believe they were mostly symbolic, a municipal gesture to reassure the public without investing in real infrastructure. Others argue that sniffers like Étienne played an essential role in early environmental diagnostics, using their senses to do the work of instruments that wouldn't exist for another 100 years. The truth is likely both. Étienne's notes were often passed along to city magistrates who might fine an offender, post a warning, or send a more hands-on inspector. But here's the thing, the nose always got there first. You arrive at a boarding house next, a tall, creaking structure. Near the fish market, the landlady meets you out front. There's a smell, she whispers, eyes darting side to side. In the third-floor hallway, it's suggestive. Étienne ascends the narrow staircase, which smells mostly of pickled herring and wet wool. But when you reach the landing, yes, you smell it too. Faint, sour, not dangerous, but curious. He sniffs. He paces. He kneels and sniffs again near the wall panel. Then he grins. Someone's hiding cheese, he says. A knock at a nearby door reveals the culprit, a young apprentice cheesemonger who's been aging contraband goat cheese in a tin under his bed to avoid market taxes. The smell isn't a health threat, it's just ambitious. Wrap it better, Étienne says. Or eat it faster. Back on the street, you watch him scribble another report. This one, less dire. Third floor funk, Rue de Poissonnerie. Aging dairy in non-dairy zone. Human error, not rot. And then, like always, he moves on. The city beckons. You realize, watching him, that the sniffer occupies a strange role. Not enforcer, not healer, not even cleaner. He's the narrator, the one who reads the city through his nose. Who knows that bad smells don't always mean bad things, and that good smells can still lead to trouble. You catch one last whiff as you turn the corner. Sawdust, warm milk, and what might be tangerine peels drying on a windowsill. It's not unpleasant, for now. Étienne starts his morning the same way every day, by smelling the wind. You find him at the edge of the Pont Neuf, his coat collar turned up, his notebook already out. The sun is still lazy in the sky, and the city hasn't quite decided whether it wants to smell like wet cobblestones or freshly baked chaos. A light fog drapes the river like a sigh. He closes his eyes, inhales deeply, and mutters, hints of burnt pear, possibly soap. Direction, west-southwest. It's part ritual, part meteorology, and also part self-preservation. Because today, Étienne is taking you along for a full shift, not just a random investigation. No specific complaint. This is the daily route, a methodical traversal of the most scent-dense zones of Paris. A sniffing census, if you will. It begins with a trip through the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Antoine, a street with more craftsmen per square foot than anywhere else in the city. Woodworkers, chair makers, instrument tuners. The smell is oddly pleasant. Pine shavings, walnut oil, glue made from animal hides, which is less pleasant, and the warm tang of varnish. Étienne pauses at a workshop entrance and breathes in. Resin's gone cloudy, he says. Too much damp. He logs it. The woodworker thanks him and offers a small loaf of rye as payment. Étienne accepts it with a polite sniff. Next stop, a bakery row. You expect sweet comfort. And at first, that's what you get. Yeast, butter, roasted almonds. It smells like childhood memories, even though you've never actually had a childhood in 18th century Paris. But then the smell shifts. You follow Étienne into a side alley where a baker is pulling burnt loaves from a soot-caked oven. The smoke is acrid. The crusts are scorched. He fans the air sheepishly. Chimney needs scraping, Étienne notes. You're seasoning your bread with charcoal. The baker winces. Notice that, he says. Hoped no one else would. Étienne's nose, it seems, is not governed by hope. Further down the street, a butcher's stall hums with activity. The smell is robust. Fat, iron, straw, and something disconcertingly gamey. Étienne walks slowly here. He takes his time. His face is unreadable. Then he lifts a burlap sheet covering a side pile of cuts and jerks back. Too long, he says. The butcher shrugs. Yesterday's batch. Étienne raises an eyebrow. Then it spent the night dreaming of vengeance. This is not aged. This is resentful. The butcher laughs, but the sheet stays lifted. The offending meat is moved. Étienne scribbles. Faubourg market, early spoilage, high humidity. Product confused about its timeline. Remove before it declares war. You keep walking. The city shifts beneath your feet. In the tannery quarter, the smells get louder. The scent of urine-soaked hides returns like a bad flashback. The air has weight. It presses against your forehead, makes your tongue feel fuzzy. Étienne doesn't flinch. He stands near a vat, sniffs, nods. Still better than that monk with the cabbage soup, he says quietly. Even sniffers have trauma. After the tanneries comes a detour through Apothecary Row, a stretch of street where herbalists, spice dealers, and experimental physicians hawk their scented wares. Here, the air is sharp, peppery, medicinal, dried orange peel. Clove. Something that smells like camphor had a disagreement with vinegar. Étienne pauses at a display of dried herbs. Sassafras, he mutters. Meant for teeth. Now smells like despair. You don't ask how he knows. You just follow him to the next stall, where an enterprising young chemist offers a sample of his newest creation. Nose oil for gentlemen. Étienne takes a whiff. Notes of lamp oil, regret, and faintly toasted walnut. The chemist blinks. Thank you. Étienne nods politely and moves on. By noon, you've reached the laundry district. Clothes flap from windows like surrender. Flags. Women scrub furiously at wooden basins, elbow deep in soap suds. The air smells like lye, damp cotton, and the collective strain of generations trying to keep shirts white in a world determined to make them brown. Mixed batch today, Étienne says. Someone's reusing vinegar, and that basin has secrets. A laundress overhears him and smirks. You're not wrong. It belonged to my mother-in-law. He doesn't comment. You stop at a street-side vendor selling fried dough. The scent is comforting. Sweet oil, sugar, flour. Étienne accepts a small piece, sniffs, takes a bite, chews thoughtfully. Too much saffron, he says, but bless you for trying. He tips a coin into the vendor's hat and moves on. You begin to understand his rhythm. His pace isn't fast, it's thoughtful. He walks like someone listening for a melody only he can hear. Occasionally he stops in the middle of a street, raises a hand, and spins slowly. Sometimes he writes. Sometimes he just nods and says, "All is well for now." By late afternoon, he reaches the Seine again. He leans over the railing. You do the same. Today, the river smells like wet rope, broken fruit, and something vaguely botanical. Mint? Parsley? Someone dumped kitchen scraps upstream, he says. You both watch as a current carries a cabbage leaf and a cork past the stone supports. Tomorrow, it will smell like boiled cabbage and regret, he adds. You sit on the low wall, tired, slightly dizzy, your nose tingling from overuse. Étienne stretches and opens his notebook to the first page. He's filled it. 23 pages of scent notes. Observations, warnings, the occasional doodle of a rat holding its nose. You ask him what he'll do with it. Deliver it, he says. To the Office of Municipal Health and Urban Ambiguities. You blink. That's a real office, he shrugs. It has a door, and sometimes someone opens it. Then he smiles for the first time today. You smile too, because now you know the truth. Paris doesn't announce its stories. It releases them, one molecule at a time, and someone has to chase them down. It's the following morning, and Étienne is in high spirits, which is unsettling. He waves his notebook in the air like a victory flag and informs you that today's task is one of the most delicate, dignified, and delightfully absurd in the history of the sniffer's profession. You're going to read the official smell reports. Yes, real, bound, handwritten documents filed by the noses of Paris over the past few decades. These aren't dull municipal records. They are aromatic literature, complete with metaphors, margin doodles, and dramatic flair that would make Molière raise a powdered eyebrow. Étienne has been granted rare access to the archives of the Bureau de l'air et des nuisances urbaines, the Office of Air and Urban Nuisances, though most people just call it the Sneeze Bureau. You follow him through a creaky door on the Ile de la Cité, up a spiral staircase that smells like old paper and shoe polish, and into a dim room filled with books that look like they've been gently composting for years. A clerk hands Étienne a worn leather-bound ledger titled Comptes Olfactifs 1712-1729. The first entry reads, 8th of March, 1712. A miasma of cooked radish and soft stone drifts over Rue des Écrivains. Suspect underlying sewer breach or large-scale rutabaga boiling. Unclear. You sit down in a wobbly chair and lean over his shoulder as he flips to another. 16th of June, 1714. The southern meat quarter hums with summer enthusiasm. Warm, lard, pickled ambition, and a thrilling undercurrent of imminent cheese. Advise shade and patience. Another. 2nd of November, 1716. Alley behind Saint-Germain Market emits a scent reminiscent of abandonment. Sour apples, rope mold, and discontent. Étienne beams. You see, he says, we're not just noses, we're chroniclers, historians, poets of the putrid. He flips forward to an entry marked with a gold star and a smudge. 9th of January, 1721. Unexplained sweetness in Marais district. Faint but persistent. Molasses over damp hay. Investigated. Found broken molasses barrel leaking into stable. Horse appeared unconcerned. Some entries are surprisingly bureaucratic. 26th of April, 1723. Unacceptable odours reported near. Hôtel de Ville. Determined to be official laundry hanging too near drain outlet. Solution, move laundry, or the drain. Others verge on surreal. 14th of October, 1724. Encountered mysterious perfume cloud near Rue des Trois Frères. No visible source, described as rose dipped in mint sorrow. Dispersed before. Capture. You glance at Étienne, who's now flipping pages with childlike excitement. This one's my favourite, he says, pointing. 20th of May, 1726. Detected long corridor of alternating odours. Soup, soap, sulphur, and silence. Suspect boarding house with confused tenants and strong opinions. No action taken. The beauty of these reports isn't just their oddity, it's their precision. Each sniffer had their own taxonomy. Some used musical metaphors, a high-pitched lavender with a bass note of beef. Others treated smells like wine, vintage vinegar with earthy tannins and a rebellious finish. But all shared a goal: to make the invisible visible, to warn the city of what it couldn't see. but absolutely could smell. You reach a section labeled Notable Recurrences, and Étienne reads aloud. Rue des Bouchers has appeared in 9 separate complaints for pungent repetition. Cause appears to be eternal. Odour at foot of Pont Louis has re-emerged annually, believed tied to fish market runoff and spring enthusiasm. Cesspit beneath Théâtre du Palais Royal, described in 4 reports as deeply theatrical but lacking narrative closure. Then he flips to a final section, handwritten notes from sniffers themselves. These weren't official. These were musings, journal entries, sent haikus even. One reads, "Sometimes I think I smell my own future, and it smells like wet twine and lost gloves." Another, "The wind changed today. For a moment, Paris almost smelled like hope." And one that simply says, "My left nostril is better with cheese, my right handles sewage. Together, we survive." You close the ledger and sit back. There's something oddly moving about it all. These were people walking the same streets, smelling the same stew of life and rot, trying to make sense of it with nothing but words and willpower. They weren't trying to clean the city or scold it or escape it. They were trying to understand it. You ask Étienne if these reports ever led to real change. He shrugs. Sometimes. A landlord got fined. A sewer got dredged. A bakery got shame-cleaned. Mostly, though, they reminded the city that someone was paying attention. And that, you realize, is the real purpose of the Sniffer's report. It's not about solutions. It's about witnessing, about recording the rise and fall of cabbage steam and mutton mist, about telling the story of a city through the air it exhales. As you leave the archive, the clerk hands Étienne a small slip of paper. A new complaint. Smells like opportunity. He tucks it into his coat and grins. "Back to work," he says. "Paris waits for no-nos." And off you go again. The sun has dipped low over Paris, casting the city in that peculiar golden light that almost makes the smell of old fish and horse sweat feel cinematic. Almost Étienne has another destination for you. A house in the Saint-Roch district, known for its apothecaries, wig makers, and an alarming number of cats. The complaint? A house that smells too clean. Yes, you heard that right. Too clean. The report came from a neighbor who described the scent as unnaturally floral, persistent, and emotionally disorienting. You're already intrigued. You arrive at the door just as a man is exiting, with a very stiff gait and a handkerchief pressed to his nose. "You'll see," he mutters. "It's not right." Étienne knocks, and the door opens to reveal a young woman in an immaculate apron, hair tucked neatly beneath a bonnet. She curtsies. "Do come in," she says, "and already you smell it. Jasmine. But not just jasmine. Layers upon layers of floral perfume. There's rose, orange blossom, a trace of something sharp and acidic. The scent is overpowering, but not unpleasant, like being tackled by a polite bouquet. Étienne steps inside, inhales once, then pauses. The house is spotless. Gleaming floors, polished furniture, dried lavender tucked behind picture frames. A cat with an actual ribbon tied to its tail lounges, on a windowsill, looking smug and very much like it just judged your boots. The scent deepens as you move through the parlor. It's dense, rich, and confusing. Étienne turns to the woman. "Do you use perfume to clean?" She smiles. "No, just steam and essential waters. My father was an herbalist. He left me all his tinctures. You notice something odd. There's no natural scent. No smell of wood, wax, food, damp linen, or dust. It's like someone erased every trace of domestic life and replaced it with lilac-scented static." Étienne opens his notebook. House of unnatural clarity. Smell lacks human inflection. Floral excess disguises absence. He turns back to the woman. Do you live alone? She nods. Just me. And the cat. You glance at the cat again. It still looks smug. Perhaps even more so. Back outside, Étienne looks troubled. A house without a smell is like a man without memory. Suspicious. You ask if it's dangerous. Not dangerous, he says. Just false. He logs it as a Class R3. Pleasant, persistent, potentially psychological. Which is apparently a real category, but it's not the only strange case. As you continue the evening, Étienne shares tales of olfactory mysteries from his years in the field, cases where scent told a story that didn't quite add up. Like the time a mansion on Rue Montorgueil suddenly began to smell of burnt toast every morning at 4 a.m. No fire, no food, no explanation. Turned out, he says, a servant was secretly baking bread to send to her brother in prison. She did it early to avoid questions. The bread failed, daily. Or the tavern that reeked of violets despite being known for beer and blood sausage. The answer? An upstairs tenant was distilling violet cordial illegally and pouring the leftovers into the wall when inspections came. The wall, as you might guess, disapproved. Then there was the house that smelled like candle wax and wet wool for 5 years straight, until a loose floorboard revealed a hidden crawl space filled with rotting theatre costumes and half-melted church candles, a combination one would never willingly invent. Historians, Étienne says, like to talk about wars, kings, plagues, but cities remember the small things, the leaks, the meals, the spilled tinctures, the bad cheese that changed everything. The nose, he insists, is the only historian that never lies, or if it does, it's at least honestly mistaken. You walk now toward the edge of the Marais, where the streets get narrower and the air gets quieter. A man passes with a wheelbarrow full of onions. Behind him, a child runs past, holding a live goose like a prize. Paris never stops being Paris. At a small square, Étienne stops. He gestures around. This is the cleanest smelling street in the quarter. No reason, no logic. It's just calm. You sniff. He's right. There's a faint smell of bread, leather polish, a trace of wood smoke. Nothing flashy. Just life, lived at the right temperature. He jots it in his book. Rue Saint-Marthe, 8:31 p.m. Smells like belonging. No action needed. You ask if he gets many of these. Not often, he says. Most reports are of what's wrong. Too sour, too loud, too moldy. But sometimes you smell something and think, this is how it's supposed to be. You sit with him a while, watching the sky shift to dusk. A dog barks 3 streets away. Someone closes a shutter. A bakery door opens, then closes. The city exhales. And for a moment, everything aligns. No rot, no rage, no perfume ambushes. Just air. Real. Lived in. Unremarkable. And therefore miraculous. You realize then that the job of a sniffer isn't always to detect crisis. Sometimes it's to notice peace, to write it down, to make sure it's not forgotten. Smell is memory's first draft, and Paris has a long story to tell. You're walking alongside Étienne through the narrow lanes of the Temple district. The sky now an indigo bruise overhead, and lanterns flicker to life one by one like fireflies that mean business. Tonight's mission isn't from a complaint or an emergency. It's a sniffing scandal. A few days ago, Étienne received an anonymous note, written in an aggressively perfumed script. There is something unnatural about the house on Rue de la Grenouillère. It is too pleasant, too consistent. Go, see, smell. The note had no signature, just a small drawing of a rose with a rat's tail. Naturally, Étienne was intrigued. You arrive at the house. It's a modest 2-story affair. Plaster facade, shuttered windows, tiny garden. But even from the street, you notice it. A strange, soft sweetness in the air. Like pastry, or expensive soap left on a windowsill too long. Étienne stops short. No smoke, he notes. No laundry, no cooking. Still, it smells curated. He sniffs once, deeply. Apricot? No. Almond. Almond and custard. You knock. A woman answers. Middle-aged, polite, wide-eyed. Yes, she asks, already tilting her head toward you with a hesitant smile. Is something wrong? Étienne flashes a token, a brass pin in the shape of a nose, and gives a practice line. City Health Scent Inspection. Routine. The woman blinks. Ah, yes, of course. Do come in. The moment you cross the threshold, it hits you full on. The smell is perfect. Not just pleasant, suspiciously pleasant, like a bakery staged for royalty, but with none of the usual crumbs or chaos. Étienne sniffs the stair rail, the floorboards, the corners, his eyes narrow. The scent is even, no peaks, no lows, like a flat painting. You wander through the parlour, where a single vase of dried roses rests on the table. Odd, you think. Dried flowers don't usually give off this much aroma, and there's no fire burning in the hearth, no candles. Yet the scent persists. The woman offers tea. Étienne declines, politely but firmly. Instead, he turns to her with a disarming tone. And how do you keep the house so fragrant? She smiles. Oh, just oils and sachets, a bit of cinnamon. I like the house to feel safe. Something about her voice is too rehearsed. Étienne walks toward a cabinet in the back of the room, pauses, opens it. Inside, row upon row of tiny glass bottles, carefully labelled. He reads the labels aloud. Fresh bread, morning. Rainy garden, noon. Baked pear, dusk. The woman fidgets. These are scent capsules, she admits. From my late husband. He was a scent maker for the court. He invented a way to suspend smells in air, mists infused with botanical oil vapors and powdered musk. He said scent should be more reliable than memory. Étienne, for once, is speechless. You peek further inside the cabinet and see a mechanism. A hand-cranked fan system, rigged with cloth strips soaked in liquid and a slow-burning wick underneath. A rudimentary vaporizer. Genius, really. Possibly illegal. But why use it now? Étienne asks gently. She hesitates, then gestures to a faded painting on the wall. A family portrait. The woman, younger. A man beside her. Children. Everyone smiling. He died 4 years ago, she says. The house changed. Started to smell empty, cold. I couldn't sleep. So I made it smell like when he was here. Morning bread, his aftershave, my pear tarts. I know it's strange. She looks down. But it helps me remember the good years. Étienne doesn't write anything down. He closes the cabinet slowly. Outside, under the lantern light, he leans against a wall and exhales. Not everything that smells too good is hiding a crime, he says. Sometimes it's just hiding grief. You stand in silence a while. The city buzzes around you, unbothered. Eventually, he pulls out his notebook and writes, Rue de la Grenouillère, 10:04 p.m. House contains memory machine masked as comfort. No complaint, no citation, only warmth. He closes the book and doesn't say another word until you reach the next corner. Then, with a dry chuckle, he says, "I still think her almond note was too ambitious." You laugh, but the moment lingers, because what you saw back there was something unexpected, a perfume of longing, someone weaponizing scent not to deceive, but to cope, to time travel, to rebuild. And for the first time, you realize what power smell holds. It's not just a warning or a nuisance. It's architecture for memory, invisible scaffolding for the past, one almond note away from a heartbreak, one whiff of pear from falling in love all over again. You pass a boulangerie closing for the night. The air is warm with leftover crust and candied citrus. Somewhere nearby, a couple argues in soft voices. A violin scratches through an open window. The moon glows like brushed pewter. And beneath it all, the scent of Paris drifts on, layered, conflicted, defiant, exactly as it should be. The following morning begins with a peculiar scent, a combination of lavender, wet wool, and municipal dread. Étienne is frowning. You find him standing in the Place de Grève, a large square once used for executions, now repurposed for something, arguably more bureaucratic. A city council meeting about smells. Yes, even the Parisian officials, long experts in ignoring the obvious, have decided the time has come to feign decisive action. Apparently, the number of public complaints about olfactory nuisances has reached a tipping point. Or more likely, a duke's wig was insulted by cabbage fumes one too many times. You and Étienne stand at the back of the public hall as councillors gather. They smell strongly of starch, pipe tobacco, and administrative evasion. The lead magistrate, whose powdered face resembles a confused donut, calls the meeting to order. "Messieurs," he begins, "Paris has a scent problem. A murmur runs through the room. We must do something. Or at least," he continues, "appear to have done something." Étienne raises an eyebrow. The proposed solutions begin. A Bakers Guild representative suggests installing perfume torches along market streets. To dazzle the nose and inspire commerce, he says, waving a cinnamon-scented cloth. No one claps. A nobleman recommends banning the sale of onions after sunset. He doesn't explain why. Someone proposes importing cleaner air from Normandy. Étienne coughs politely. The magistrate recognizes him with all the enthusiasm of someone acknowledging the return of an overdue bill. "Ah, yes, the sniffer." Étienne steps forward, no theatrics, just his notebook. He offers a quiet summary of the last quarter's findings. Odors indicate strain on the city's infrastructure, overflowing cesspits, improper waste routing, dead zones near tanneries, cheese surplus affecting Block 12. The room goes still at that last line. "No regulation is required for cheese," a cheesemonger growls. Étienne continues, unfazed. "Suggested actions: establish scheduled street cleanings, impose fines for negligent chamber pot disposal, map odor-heavy zones for seasonal management." A pause. Then a councilman says, "Could we not simply burn rosemary on every street?" Another suggests perfume fountains. Yet another proposes commissioning artists to paint happier-smelling neighborhoods, which somehow will confuse the nose into optimism. You feel your brain wilt slightly. Étienne closes his notebook with a definitive snap. The council thanks him without listening, and then returns to debating the onion embargo. Outside, Étienne sighs. The city talks, but it talks in perfume and paper You ask if his reports ever actually change anything. He shrugs. Sometimes someone gets a letter. Once, a fishmonger was forced to wash his barrels more than twice a month. You pass a man arguing with a chimney sweep about the emotional tone of his soot. It's that kind of day. Still, you follow Étienne to the office of municipal. Health. 1 room, 2 chairs, and 3 disinterested clerks. He files the previous week's smell records in a drawer so overflowing it requires a gentle body slam to close. Each page filed away is a story of rot, resilience, or rhubarb. Why? Do you keep doing it? You ask. He thinks for a moment. Then, because nobody else is paying attention. That's all. No grand speech, no poetic metaphor. And yet, there's meaning in it. The city can ignore sewage, ignore puddles, rodents, vinegar clouds, rotting, cabbage piles, and mysteriously aggressive lavender. But it can't unsmell them. They exist, they persist. And Étienne, with his tired shoes and battered notebook, insists they be noticed. You head out again. Past an open butcher's window, past a fish stall that smells like low tide and ambition, past a side alley where 2 boys are building a small tower out of broken tiles and, disturbingly, old shoes. The air hums. Paris smells, as always, like 1,000 arguments happening at once. You stop for a moment and sniff the air like Étienne. There, it is. Smoke, yeast, damp parchment, sweat, maybe ginger. Not good, not bad, just true. Back at the square, the council is still arguing. You hear someone yell lemon balm like it's an accusation. Étienne nudges your elbow. He hands you a fresh page from his notebook. The heading reads, "Smells the city refuses to smell." He hasn't written anything under it yet. But you suspect he will. Because as long as Paris breathes, so does the story it tells, through every scent it dares, or forgets, to leave behind. This morning, Étienne is wearing goggles. Well, what passes for goggles in 18th century Paris? Tinted lenses mounted on a wire frame, probably once part of some ill-fated Enlightenment invention. He looks like someone attempting to dissect the concept of air itself, and to be fair, that's not far off. Today's journey is into the strange and smoky realm of science, because in the second half of the century, the age of gut instinct and herbal poultices begins, slowly, hesitantly, and often grudgingly, to give way to experiments, apparatuses, and people with names like Dr. Hyacinthe Eugène de Charpentier, who insist that smell can be measured. Étienne doesn't like it, not because he's anti-science, but because science, as it turns out, is trying to replace him. You're headed to a newly founded laboratory near the Sorbonne, where a small team of miasma theorists are testing early versions of what they call odorometers. Yes, odorometers, in theory. These are devices that can detect dangerous smells and quantify them, assigning a level of threat to everything from garden mildew to spoiled mutton. In practice, well, let's just say one of the devices exploded last week, trying to classify the scent of overripe tomatoes. You enter a stone building with tall windows and glass bottles stacked like battlements. Inside, 3 men in powdered wigs are peering into flasks, waving feathers over boiling pots, and taking extremely solemn notes about things that smell like pickled eggs. Étienne removes his goggles. The lead scientist, Dr. Linot, greets him with distracted enthusiasm. "Ah, Monsieur Sniffer. Always good to compare notes with the organic model." Étienne blinks. Linot gestures to a small copper contraption shaped like a teapot married to a trumpet. A long leather tube coils from the spout to a metal funnel. "This," he says, "is the eudiometer 9.0. It captures airborne vapors and ranks them based on toxicity and aromatic turbulence. Étienne leans down, sniffs. It smells like mint and confusion. They run a demonstration. A servant carries in 3 jars, vinegar, dried lavender, and a suspicious grey liquid labelled only Sample C. One by one, they're poured into small dishes under the machine's intake. The dial wobbles, then stops. Lino beams. See? The needle moved. Proof of scent. Étienne raises a skeptical eyebrow. Proof of motion, at least. Historians still debate the scientific merit of these early odor-measuring machines. Some were genuinely precursors to air quality devices. Others were elaborate theatre, designed to impress patrons and secure funding from rich men who wanted Paris to smell less like its own truth. You're shown charts, graphs, a diagram of the city where each district is color-coded based on aromatic load. Étienne scans it, frowns. They mark the fish market as moderate, he mutters. Someone here has never smelled ambition through anchovies. Dr. Lino continues unfazed. He shows you a recent smell index for the past month. Étienne flips through it and sighs. Too many numbers, not enough noses. You watch as 2 assistants attempt to calibrate the device using lemons and wet clay. One of them sneezes violently into the intake funnel, causing the dial to spin wildly. Category. Catastrophic, Lino says with a proud nod. Étienne glances at you. This, he whispers, is why you can't replace intuition with steam. Still, there's something admirable in the effort. For centuries, people assumed bad smells were the cause of disease. Not just a warning sign, but the enemy itself. The miasma theory ruled. Invisible clouds of rotting air drifted through the city, seeping into lungs, infecting the healthy and wilting fresh cheese. And while they were wrong about the cause, hello, bacteria, they were right that the air told stories. Smells hinted at water gone stagnant, food gone bad, cellars gone sour, and yes, sickness nearby. So in a way, these scientists weren't wrong to try turning smell into something quantifiable, but they missed something essential. Étienne sums it up best as you exit the lab and step back into Paris proper. He waves toward the skyline. Rooftops, smoke trails, the faint scent of bread baking somewhere just out of reach. You can measure vinegar. You can measure rot. But you cannot measure the difference between a bad smell, that's dangerous, and one that's simply sad. He sniffs the air. Like cabbage, cooked alone. You walk now past an old theatre, its backstage doors wide open. The air is thick with grease paint, dust, and the echo of last night's applause. Étienne breathes deeply. Category M2, he murmurs. Melancholy with curtains. Down the street, a spice merchant unrolls his canvas shade. The smell of cloves, pepper, and ground nutmeg reaches you like a whisper from across an ocean. It mingles with the scent of old books from a stall nearby. A couple argues about the price of a leather-bound Molière play. No odorometer could pass that moment. The chemistry of emotion. The way smell and place combine to make meaning. You ask Étienne if he's worried about being replaced by machines. He smiles. Let the machines try, but they'll never understand why burnt toast at midnight on Rue du Bac means heartbreak. And maybe that's the point, because Paris isn't a lab, it's a living body. It wheezes, it simmers, it leaks, it sweetens, it surprises, and it needs someone who can read its breath, not just record it. As the wind shifts, Étienne lifts his nose. Again, somewhere, a duck is roasting. Somewhere else, something is spoiling, and someone, thank heavens, is paying attention. The bells of Saint-Eustache toll softly in the distance as dusk begins to settle once again over Paris, casting shadows in the alleys. and setting the Seine aglow with that strange, reflective amber only found at day's end. Étienne is already walking, quicker than usual. His notebook flaps against his coat like a second heartbeat. Today's concern isn't from a fish stall or a bakery or even a rogue cheese wheel. It's social tension, wrapped in linen and laced with perfume. You're headed to the Faubourg Saint-Marcel, a working-class neighborhood full of bricklayers, laundresses, and journeymen. It's a world of coarse bread, blunt shoes, and no illusions. And yet recently, this very area has become the epicenter of a scent-based uprising. At least according to the pamphlets, Étienne hands you one as you walk. The perfumed hoax, why the rich poison our air with vanity. Smell is no longer innocent. It is weaponized. Resist it. You glance up. This is a lot. Étienne sighs. The upper class has always scented themselves, but now they do it so strongly, the poor are accusing them of hiding plagues. Or worse, spreading them, because here's the uncomfortable truth. Scent had become a symbol of status, but also a sign of suspicion. The aristocrats wear layers of bergamot, jasmine, ambergris, not just to smell good, but to project health, wealth, and command over their environment. But in crowded quarters, perfume doesn't read as elegance. It reads as intrusion. You arrive at a crowded square. A group has gathered around a public fountain. Voices rise, urgent and nasal. My daughter fainted in a hallway because of that woman's cloud of violets. He wears cologne too. Cover rot, I swear it! They stink up the bakery just by walking past. In the center stands a perfumed nobleman, jacket stiff with embroidery, expression equal parts indignation and confusion. I do not stink, he says loudly. I am fragrant. The distinction is lost on the crowd. Étienne steps forward. No badge, no announcement, just a sniff. He circles once, twice, inhales deeply near the nobleman's shoulder, then declares, tonka bean, orange peel, musk, too concentrated, applied in heat, mistake of timing, not character. The crowd is confused. The nobleman blinks. What does that mean? Étienne smiles kindly. It means you overdid it, but you are not, as rumored, the source of urban decay. Laughter ripples through the square. But it's thin, nervous. Because underneath it all is something sharper, class resentment, bubbling up through the cracks of cobblestone and chamber pots. Historians still debate how much olfactory class warfare influenced pre-revolutionary France. But the signs were there. The nobles masked their lives in lilac. The poor lived in cabbage. Each believed the other's scent was a kind of lie, and sometimes that lie had consequences. Étienne recalls a riot from 2 years prior, sparked, unbelievably, by a perfume shop opening near a tannery. The shop's owners installed incense, braziers outside to gentrify the street. Locals saw it as an insult. The conflict ended with broken windows, spilled oils, and one apprentice who smelled like roses for 9 days. Back in the square, tempers cool. A woman speaks up. It's not just the smell. It's the way they walk in, noses up, like we're the ones stinking. There it is. Scent as a mirror. Not of the nose, but of power. You follow Étienne away from the crowd, and as you pass an alley, he pauses. Smell that? You do. A soft, woody aroma. Not perfume. Not rot. Something gentle. It's coming from a cart parked beside a bakery. A travelling herbalist, as it turns out, brewing small bundles of dried lavender, mint, and lemon peel. Air refreshers, she says. For shops, for homes, for peace. She hands you one. It smells like bedtime in a well-loved house. Étienne pays her, then holds the bundle up thoughtfully. You know, he says, not every scent is about showing off. Some are just boundaries, comfort, memory. You ask if he thinks the classes will ever agree on smell. No, he says immediately. But they might learn to sniff each other without flinching. That night, he logs the incident. Faubourg, Saint-Marcel, 6:47 p.m. Scent conflict rooted in perception, not chemistry. Recommend education. And restraint in musk application. He closes his notebook and looks over the rooftops. Paris argues through its windows, its walls, and its wine. But mostly, it argues with its nose. You think about that as you walk home. A nobleman smells like myrrh. A laundress smells like lye and lavender. A carpenter smells like varnish and bread. None of them are wrong. They're just loud. And Paris is, as always, listening. The morning air is unusually crisp. Crisp in the way old bread is crisp. Dry, brittle, and liable to crumble if handled too roughly. You meet Étienne near the abandoned chapel at Rue des Filles-Dieu, a place where the city seems to pause. The streets are still damp from last night's rain. The usual Parisian aroma of boiled grain and tired cheese is muted, replaced by something more subdued. Absence. Today, Étienne says softly, we visit the ghosts, not the literal kind, the forgotten kind. Because with all its noise and rot and perfume wars, Paris is also a city that changes, a city that forgets. And with every new street paved, every alley filled, a little of the old scent vanishes, like a house that no longer smells like your grandmother. And so today's assignment, tracking the lost smells of Paris. Étienne leads you down a winding side street you swear you've never seen before, Rue du Repos Silencieux. He stops outside, a faded wooden door, and gestures. This was once a candlemaker's workshop, he says. Beeswax, bayberry, tallow. The whole street smelled of light. Now it smells like damp stone and moss. You press your nose to the old wood, faintly. So faintly, you think you catch a whiff of wax. Or maybe it's imagination. Étienne smiles. That counts. You head next to what used to be a public bathhouse, now a storage facility for broken cartwheels and dusty urns. The smell is dry, granular, but Étienne points to a stone bench near the wall. Cedar oil, he murmurs. They used to massage visitors with it. It lingers in the cracks. He kneels, presses his nose against the stone, and closes his eyes. You do the same. The scent is barely there, a memory trying not to be remembered. Historians still argue how much olfactory memory affects collective identity. Some say cities evolve their scent signature, just like architecture or language. Others dismiss it as romantic nonsense. But Étienne, he believes in smell fossils. The air keeps secrets, he says. You just have to know where to inhale. You visit a former spice importer's home, now a locksmith's shop. The new scent is metal and oil, but in the far back, near a cracked windowsill, there's something else. Cinnamon, clove, maybe nutmeg. You're starting to notice them too. Aromas buried under time. Not the stench of the present, but the perfume of what used to be. Like archaeological strata. But for your face. At the edge of the Latin Quarter, you stop at a bakery that no longer exists. Étienne doesn't need to explain. The stone threshold, worn from 1,000 feet. The iron brackets still attached to the facade. You can almost hear the rustle of paper bags. the creak of wooden trays. He sniffs. Wheat, burnt crust, and apricot. You smell it too, just barely, as though the walls themselves remember. Then he pulls out a small vial, his own scent archive. He opens the cork. Immediately, the air fills with old soap and sun-warmed linen. Étienne breathes deeply. Rue de Charenton, 1749, the laundry yard that collapsed in a storm. I saved this the week before it closed. You ask how? Cloth. Stored it in wax. A poor man's ambergris. He has dozens of these, he says. Trapped pieces of the past. The smell of a locksmith's gloves. A garden before it was paved over. A church pew polished with lemon balm. Some have already faded. Others have turned into strange hybrids. But all of them tell a story, and none of them exist anymore. You walk now to the river. Sit beside Étienne as he uncorks another vial, this one sharp, citrusy, with a hint of vinegar and iron. Saint-Antoine Fish Market, 1736. Gone. Fire. You sit in silence as it drifts past. Not unpleasant, but unmistakably gone. It's strange, he says. We talk about what we build, what we lose in fire, in war, in time, but no one remembers when a smell disappears. You look around. The modern smells, modern in the 1700s sense, are still there. Tobacco, paint, roasted chestnuts. But some corners, some smells, they're just not coming back. At an old cemetery wall, he lifts another vial. This one smells like lilies, beeswax, and dusty prayers. A smell that makes you feel like you should whisper, even outdoors. You think of all the lives lived here. The bread eaten, the letters written, the soap used, the rain that brought out the scent of wet brick and iron railings. None of that's in the textbooks, but it's in the air, just fainter now. You return to Étienne's apartment near the end of the day. He pulls out a scroll and begins a new list. Scents gone missing. Updated inventory. Peppermint from the candy stall on Rue Voltaire. Varnish from the puppet theatre on Rue des Petits Champs. Sheep's wool from the dyer's corner off Rue Saint-Lazare. Onion pies at Dusk, Rue du Sabot, lost since 1751. He sighs, and at the bottom, in smaller script, my father's shaving soap, last remembered 1742. Neither of you speak for a moment. Then, quietly, Étienne says, we remember with the brain, but we relive with the nose. You nod. Outside, the city continues. Smoke, laughter, bread, ash, dog, mint, wet boots, horses, Paris. Still, full of scent, still missing some, and someone, somewhere, is still inhaling. Just in case. It's early evening, and Étienne stands on a footbridge watching barges drift lazily down the Seine. His notebook is closed, his satchel still full, but there's something different in his posture, lighter, as if he's come to the end of a very long sentence and is finally reaching for a period. Tonight's conversation is not about what to smell, but what it all meant. You sit beside him, legs dangling off the stone edge of the bridge. Below, the river gurgles softly, dragging along the city's invisible stories. Soaked paper, rotted wood, a pear core, a lost button, perhaps a secret. Do you ever wonder, you ask, if this whole sniffing thing really mattered? Étienne doesn't answer right away. Then, after a pause, once I stopped a bakery from collapsing. You blink. Bread, he explains. Smelled wrong. Off. Sweet but hollow. Turned out to be gas leaking through a cracked pipe beneath the oven, told the owner. He thought I was mad. Then it exploded. 2 days later, after he fixed it, he shrugs. So, sometimes, yes, you laugh, but he's serious. And now that you've seen the city through his eyes and his nostrils, you realize that every story you've followed began with a scent. A little whiff that turned into a trail that turned into a question that led to a truth. Even the small ones. The burnt cabbage that revealed a rat's nest, the violet overload that disguised grief, the stale vinegar that outed a failing tannery. Every scent, a code waiting to be cracked. And yet, even sniffers like Étienne have limits. Because as Paris modernizes, the city begins to outgrow its noses. He points to a line of newly installed sewer grates, their iron mouths yawning between cobblestones. See that? He says. It's the future. Indeed, the Parisian sewers are coming. Slow at first, but soon to be a marvel of engineering. Stone tunnels, organized flow, covered drains, even running water. It'll change everything. And in that change, men, like Étienne, human noses, will fade. Not because their work wasn't valuable, but because the problem they were trained to navigate will be redesigned out of existence. Well, you say, that's good, isn't it? He smiles faintly. It is, and it isn't. Because what the city gains in cleanliness, it may lose in intuition. There's something about walking a street and knowing, just by scent, that someone's overcooked a hair or that a drain is about to erupt. There's something about feeling the soul of a neighborhood not through maps or ordinances, but through your nose. And once the air is scrubbed clean, some truths will be harder to find, he says. You stroll together through one of the new boulevards, wide, tree-lined, freshly paved, a sign of the future. The air smells like cut stone and drying plaster. Pleasant, yes, but bland, like a page with no ink. You pass a construction site where a row of tenements once stood. Étienne pauses, squints at the empty space. This used to smell like stew, he says. Every Sunday, and once, just once, it smelled like burned letters. He doesn't explain. He doesn't have to. You walk now through an older neighborhood slated for demolition soon. The scent returns, drying herbs in windows, cellar mold, paraffin wax, onions crisping in duck fat. It's chaotic, but it's real. You feel it. You ask if he'll retire soon. Eventually, he says. The reports get shorter. The city gets quieter. He hands you a page from his notebook. Final recommendations for the nasal registry of Paris. Train the next generation to smell what's missing. Archive air, not just artifacts. Don't trust silence, even when it smells good. Remember that every corner has a scent history. Respect it. Never forget the difference between a bad smell and an important one. You fold the paper carefully and tuck it into your pocket. Later, at a small cafe with a view of the Pont Marie, you sit and drink bitter coffee while Étienne logs what might be one of his last daily entries. He sniffs the air. Chestnuts roasting. Damp stone. Candle wax. He writes, smells like a city preparing to forget what it never thanked. And there it is, the truth of his work. Not heroism, not martyrdom, just witness. As you walk home, the air begins to shift again, cooler, cleaner, maybe emptier, but you catch it, just before the wind turns, a whisper of horse sweat, drying parchment, and a faint wisp of roasted duck skin. Paris, exhaling a memory. You smile and follow it home. Night falls like a blanket tugged a little too tightly over the city. The lanterns glow, puddles mirror stars they'll never meet, and the streets, those stained, storied veins of Paris, quiet into something almost sacred. You and Étienne walk without speaking now. There's no destination, just a final loop. A kind of farewell tour for a profession no one ever properly recognized. The Rue Saint-Denis is half empty. The smell is familiar. Bread crust, wet iron, and the last drift of someone's dinner. Onions and duck bones in a broth that's probably better than it looks. Étienne doesn't bother taking notes now. His hands stay in his coat pockets. His nose knows it all by heart. He nods toward a shuttered building. Used to be a milliner's shop, he says. Always smelled like starch, feathers, and disappointment. You chuckle. Around the corner, a horse snorts softly in its stall. You catch the dusty, warm scent of hay and leather, deeply animal and oddly comforting. Further down, a bakery's hearth still smoulders. You pause beside it, the air thick with baked sugar and the faintest flicker of ash. Not unpleasant, but enough to tell Étienne what he needs to know. Burn the crust again, he says. No judgment, just knowledge. And maybe that's the most human part of all this. Not control, not even hygiene. Just the ability to recognize something invisible, to name it, to say, this is not right, or this is joy, or this reminds me of home. You reach the courtyard behind a convent wall. Quiet, still. You've been here before. There's always a certain softness to the air here. Clean linen, melted wax, the occasional whiff of chalk dust and rosemary. It smells like humility, like patience, like secrets. Étienne closes his eyes. This one, he murmurs. I'll miss, and you will too. Because over these weeks, you've come to understand that the city is not just bricks and bells and bodies. It's layers of breath, of presence, of leftover lives clinging to doorframes and floorboards. And while the rest of the world measures progress in noise, speed, and fire, Étienne measured it in trace evidence, not of crime, but of living. A half-empty jar of pickled cabbage in a cellar, the citrus peel forgotten behind a wall, the almond oil in a coat passed from mother to daughter. These things matter because they remind us that someone was here and that they tried to make the air just a little kinder. You walk him to his building. He doesn't go in right away. He looks out over the rooftops one last time. The city murmurs below. It smells like rain on tile, old dust, a blown-out candle. Paris is tired, so is he. He hands you his final page. Last notes, Rue des Ursulines, honeyed plaster. Rue de Charenton, broth, absinthe, rust. Rue Saint-Roch, mint, laundry, resignation. And the bridge near Pont-Neuf still carries the scent of stories, told in whispers, left behind in shoe prints. He doesn't sign it. He doesn't have to. You stand in the quiet, one final inhale. The air is cool now, clean enough to make you almost miss the rot. You watch as Étienne disappears into the stairwell, closing the door behind him with the softest click. Paris exhales once more, and you let the silence rise. So, now, you sit back in your bed, or your chair, or wherever you've chosen to drift tonight, and slowly, you let the images fade. Let the scent of the Seine soften into stillness. Let the noise of carts and footsteps and muttered curses dissolve like morning fog. Let the smell of violets and vinegar, of boiled onion and beeswax, fall away like old stories. Paris has quieted. The candles are snuffed. The ink is dry. The rooftops, those crooked, ancient shoulders, settle into sleep. And if you breathe in now just gently, maybe you'll still catch something. A memory left in the folds of an apron. A loaf cooling on a forgotten windowsill. A cat with a tail of soot and a name nobody remembers. Maybe you'll remember that smell tells us we're still here, that we're living still, present, sensing, absorbing, and that someone, somewhere, is noticing. That maybe tonight, that someone is you. So let yourself drift. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts wander back through narrow streets and quiet staircases, through bakery windows and warm stones after rain, because the city sleeps, and so should you.